So, good evening. My name is Lee Clancy, and I'm with the League of Women Voters of Linn County. The League is a nonprofit volunteer political organization which neither supports nor opposes any candidate or any political party. The League encourages citizen participation in government and is open to any citizen 16 years of age or older. This forum is part of our voter education efforts to help voters make informed decisions at the upcoming elections. We hope that over the course of this program, you will learn more about the candidates and what they hope to do for our county. Welcome back to this candidates forum if you're a carryover from the last one, between Republican Adam Jensen and Democrat Stacy Walker, who are both running for Linn County Supervisor District 2. I will start by explaining some procedures for the forum with which each candidate received ahead of time and has agreed to. Each candidate will have 2 minutes for an opening statement, 2 minutes for a closing statement, and 2 minutes to answer each question that you have provided to us. The timekeepers are sitting here in the first row, and when there's a half a minute left on speaking time, the timekeeper will hold up a card that says 30 seconds, and then 15 seconds, and then wrap up when you see the stop sign, because if you don't, I will say thank you very much, and we will go on to the next question or the next speaker. Candidates will confine their statements and responses to relevant issues and refrain from any personal attacks. This forum is being recorded by Robin Cash, who's back here, of the Neighborhood Network News, and will be available to watch on the lwvlinncounty.org website and www.neighborhoodnetworknews.com. In addition, there's another gentleman back here who is here for Pro Video, and he is also filming it, and it will be streaming live on Pro Video's Facebook page. So if you want to go to Pro Video's Facebook page, you can also see this. Please encourage your friends and neighbors who weren't able to be here tonight to access those three websites. If you have not already done so, I would ask that you please turn off or silence your cell phone now. And if at any time during the forum you cannot hear me or either of the candidates, please let us know. We request that you treat all candidates fairly. Please remain quiet throughout the forum, no clapping, cheering, or calling out, with the exception that after their closing statements, you may, if you wish, clap for both candidates. You are encouraged to submit questions for the candidates on the provided pieces of paper. Questions must be addressed to both candidates and must apply to issues or qualifications for this particular office. Raise your hand if you'd like another piece of paper or to have your question collected. A lead panel, which is right over here, will review the question for legibility, clarity, and applicability to both candidates. I will read absolutely as many of the questions as time allows, sometimes perhaps combining similar questions in an effort to cover a variety of topics. So, we have done a coin flip, and Mr. Jensen, let me just see. What did I say?
Said coin flip.
Coin flip, and Mr. Jensen is going to begin with the opening comments, followed by Mr. Walker.
I tried to defer to the second half, but they wouldn't let me. So, my name's Adam Jensen. I'm originally here from Cedar Rapids. I grew up, I went to school in Hiawatha Elementary School. I went to Harding Middle School, and I ended up graduating from Xavier in 2001. Definitely a homegrown, hometown type of guy. You know, I love Cedar Rapids. Throughout my extensive school and business acumen, I have attained my BA in biology with a minor in biochemistry from Augustana College. I also wrote the pre-pharmacy curriculum while I went to school there, and I was the instructor for a couple months until they found a new professor. I also have 2 published research papers, and so I've worked through government agencies trying to allocate money, and let me tell you, that's a labyrinth. Later on, I worked for Walgreens. I started out as a technician for them. I worked my way up into assistant manager. So I have worked with Fortune 500 companies. Currently, I work for Kraft Heinz. I'm a second and third shift supervisor for them, to which I have worked in multi-million-dollar accounts, and I've worked in HR. I'm also military. I just got back from 6 years overseas. I was a civil affairs trauma sergeant for the military, and with that, I was an E4, which is a lower level person in an E8 position. So for about a year and a half, I worked 4 levels above what I should have. And at that time, I had over 4,000 soldiers of records that were under my discretion. With that as well, I also have awards from there where I had personally gone through and inoculated over 15,000 soldiers and families while I was there. So I have a extensive background, and like I said, I just attained my MBA, so I have a master's in business administration. So I have not only the business acumen from working with multi-million-dollar accounts, but I also have the education background as well. I'd like to thank you very much and thank the League of Women Voters for having me here, and happy be here with Stacy and have a great forum and debate tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Jensen. Mr. Walker.
All right, thank you. First of all, thanks to the League of Women Voters for all the work you do in this county and around the country. I appreciate it, for sponsoring this forum. Thank you to Mr. Jensen for agreeing to this forum, and thank you for your service in our military. I think that's important. So my name is Stacy Walker. I too was born and raised here in Cedar Rapids. Went to McKinley Middle School and Washington High School, and then I did 4 years at the University of Iowa, and I studied political science at the University of Iowa. While I was in college, I started a nonprofit organization that's still in existence today, and in fact it operates across all of the middle schools in the Cedar Rapids Community School District and some of the high schools, and it works to keep students on track to graduate, particularly at-risk students. After college, I went to Washington, D.C., where I worked for the Case Foundation, started by Steve and Jean Case. We worked on social ventures around the world. I then went on to work for a member of the President's Council for Jobs and Economic Competitiveness, which we created one of President Obama's signature economic program. I came back to Iowa in 2012, worked on President Obama's re-election campaign. I then worked for the Iowa Democratic Party, working for progressive candidates up and down the ticket. I worked on a gubernatorial campaign and 2 congressional campaigns before going on to work in the private sector for one of the fastest growing hotel development firms in the country, managing a portfolio of assets of over $400 million. I'm here today running for Linn County Supervisor to bring my experience both in the business world and in the nonprofit world to bear and try to solve some of the problems we face. So I'm asking for your support, and I'm looking forward to a spirited conversation. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Mr. Walker will have the first question. As I mentioned, each candidate will have 2 minutes in which to answer the questions, and but don't feel as though you need to take all 2 minutes if you don't need to. But you are certainly welcome to take them if you must. Okay. So the first question, actually, there are 2 questions that are basically the same.
Okay.
What kind of previous experience or what are your qualifications do you have that transfer to the job of Linn County Supervisor? And Mr. Walker, you're first.
Well, I'm glad to have that question first. I feel like I kind of ran down my CV in the introductory remarks. But look, most of my relevant experience comes from working in the private sector, as I mentioned, working for one of the fastest growing privately owned hotel development companies in the country, where I was responsible for multi-million-dollar projects and multi-million-dollar budgets and over 1,000 employees across the country. I also worked with Built by Iowa, which is a private equity firm that directed investments into Iowa-based companies that had a social good mission attached to it. In addition, most recently, most of you might know that I serve as a co-chair of the Safe, Equitable, and Thriving Communities Task Force, which is a task force that was chartered by the City of Cedar Rapids, Linn County, and the Cedar Rapids Community School District to look into the systemic causes of poverty and gun violence. All of this work is relevant to the scope, the vast scope of work that supervisors have to do. So I believe that my experience in the private sector, my experience in the public sector with nonprofits, My experience in this community, solving problems across the county already, is what qualifies me to do the job.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Walker. Mr. Jensen.
Thank you. As I had said before, I have a vast multitude of experience in different fields. One that I can definitely tout, I know that you're very big on education, is my pre-pharmacy curriculum that I wrote for my college. They have a 98% acceptance rate from that. The other 2% are those that have decided not to go into the pharmacy field. From there, I also have the private sector and public sector, both in my what we call toolbox in the military. What we do is we take all the individual things that we have learned and used and utilize them in other aspects of life. One would be my ability to bring in 15,000 people that I inoculated. Also holding their accountability for their records and being able to utilize that in a long-term position. Also, excuse me, another thing that I have been working with is I'll be bell ringing with the Salvation Army here, and I will be working with them to, work Toys for Tots and for all the great things that they do for the county and for everyone around here. There has been so many things that I've said, like working with multi-million-dollar accounts. For Walgreens, for just recently with Kraft Heinz, I saved over $1.5 million in inventory costs alone. And that was within 6 months of taking the job. Now, if we're talking about saving money, that's one thing that we might get to later on, is saving money for the county. And staying at 5 to 3, we should stay at 5 but reduce our salaries, because why are we making as much as a governor of the state? We have one county that we're responsible for, and we should not be taking the taxpayers' money and lining our pockets with it. Thank you.
Okay, this next question is a bit of a follow-up. You sort of mentioned a few of the things that this question asks, Mr. Jensen, so it will go to you first. What fiscal management experience do you bring to the role of the county supervisor? What size budget have you managed, and what was your biggest fiscal challenge?
Good question. I have ranged between $1 million to $10 million with inventory control and management. Right now, I am an basically inventory specialist, a materials manager for Kraft Heinz. With that, like I had mentioned, I've saved them over $1.5 million in the first 6 months of my employment there alone. Also, budgetary concerns with the military. I was the head of the Relief and Emergency Aid Fund while I was there. And with that, we would allocate the funds to the individual soldiers that needed to come back that had Red Cross messages. And so with that, we actually had one individual who lived on a private island that cost the taxpayers over $35,000 per person in a 5-person family. I had to find a way to basically cut back those costs, find out which flights we could change them to, and get his family there for the unfortunate loss of a family member. With that being said, I believe that here in Linn County, we are the second largest county in the state. Why would we ever be running at a fiscal deficit at any point in time? Why should we be running at a ZBB, that's zero business base balance, when we have so many tax dollars coming in? And if you look at the Linn County Auditor's report right now, if you look and you see the non-transparency that's going on, you can see the first allocated amount, what it's going to. Then there's dashes and lines on each individual statements, and then at the bottom, it shows you the money's been spent. So we need to take that and show everyone and be more transparent here in Linn County. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Walker.
Yeah, so as I mentioned in my introductory remarks, I have served as the Chief of Staff for Patel Endeavors and Hawkeye Hotels. And again, that is a company with a portfolio of assets that exceeds $400 million. We regularly engaged in working on multi-million-dollar projects. And aside from that work, I worked with Built by Iowa. And that, again, was a private equity firm that invested in Iowa-based businesses. And as many of you know, before you make an investment of any size, you have to do due diligence on that company, on that investment. And so part of that goes into looking at how this company has spent money in the past that they have had. Working with hotels, you got to figure out employee budgets and how much to spend in staffing your hotel, how much to spend in inventory. So all of these things come into play. It's a philosophy that I like to say you develop over time in your approach to budgets. You know, I have a philosophical approach that I like to employ when it approaches budgets, and that is one, you know, health and safety comes first. So when looking at the county budget, we do not compromise on things of health and safety. Two, you don't have to score a touchdown on every play, which means if we can't get it in this fiscal budget cycle, then we look for ways and alternative funding streams to get it done the next budget cycle. And lastly, I think what we need is a greater commitment to progress as opposed to any sort of fiscal doctrine. The answer is not always going to be a new program or new spending, but also the answer is not always going to be cutting a program and wholesale austerity. So I think we've got to be committed to the goals and the priorities of the county and approach our budget and fiscal policy in that manner.
Okay, thank you. Let's get right into some issues that are contentious within the county. What will you do not only to help the inner city part of Cedar Rapids, but also the rural areas of Linn County? And Mr. Walker, you're first.
Thank you for that question. Many of you know one of the big issues I've been talking about since before I decided to run for this office is poverty. And I think it's easy for us to sort of characterize the problem of poverty as being an inner city issue. Of course it is, but if you look at the data, you'll find that many rural communities are struggling with poverty as well. And so one of the beauties of the office of County Supervisor is that you are able to help both communities. You're able to help both populations, those who live in Cedar Rapids and that metro area and those who live in the outside of that metro area. In addition to poverty, what we are also finding is that there is a scarcity of healthcare resources in our rural communities. We know in our rural communities sometimes it's hard to find pharmacies, sometimes it's hard to find critical healthcare services. Sometimes you got to drive 15, 20, 30 miles to get to institutes that provide mental health care services. Pramod Dwivedi, who is head of the Linn County Public Health Department, is doing great work on trying to make these resources, these public health resources, more equitable. And I think the job of any county supervisor, regardless of the district that they represent, needs to be figuring out ways in which we are more equitable with the resources we have at the county. And if I'm elected, that's what I'll do.
Okay. Mr. Jensen.
Thank you for that answer there. That was great. What I would say is, though, we should not be separating and dividing everyone into this area or that area. Are we not all from Linn County? Are we not all Linn County constituents? Why do we have to differentiate those that are in inner city and those that are out in the rural areas of our county? They should all be treated with the same respect and dignity and be able to utilize all the county facilities all the time. With that being said, I know that there are difficulties getting in and utilizing the medical facilities that we do have here in Linn County. But with that being said, I would want to propose that we have a transportation system set up to the rural counties to be able to come to Cedar Rapids, to be able to help those that cannot help themselves. As you have heard before, I'm a veteran, and this is one of the big issues, near and dear to my heart. And for those that understand what is going on, is that we need to help the veterans that everybody's casting aside. So if we can bring them together and help the veterans and help the people inside the community and outside of Cedar Rapids, because our constituents are not only Cedar Rapids, they are all of Linn County. So if we work together and cross party lines and work together doing this, we should be able to help everyone, not just one area or another. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Let's move on to another subject, and Mr. Jensen, you'll take this one first. Do you support the $40 million bond for land and water conservation? If so, why? And do you think this is an equitable solution?
It's Very good question. It's kind of a two-parter. Yes, I want there to be land quality and utilized here within Linn County. But one of the things is it's not only farmers that are having these troubles. It's those within the city limits that are having these troubles as well. Because anybody can go over to Ace Hardware or go down to Walmart and they can grab fertilizer, they can grab all kinds of chemicals. But where do they go? They go into our well water. They go into the water that we're trying to say that it's all the rural areas' problem. There's so many rules and regulations that are already in place for our rural constituents and those that are farming that we should take a look at inside the city as opposed to outside the city. So if we can utilize our resources and see if we can put in place the restrictions that we have on outside of the county, we should have them inside of the city as well. Now, with that being said, I do agree with, like I said, this proposal, but it should not be a land grab. We should not utilize this money to just buy up land that we do not need and that the taxpayers don't need. Unless we're going to utilize that money for trails, for paths, for parks, if we're just going to grab the land and then let it sit there, there's no use to that. We need to utilize the money as the people allocate, not how we as Linn County supervisors would allocate. We should not be telling you how it's used. You should be telling us how it's used. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Walker?
Well, I do support the bond that will be on the ballot. I think it is sound policy, and I think it has already gone through a fairly thorough vetting process. The Linn County Soil and Conservation Board has already outlaid percentages of how the bond dollars would be used, and the bulk of the bond dollars are going to be used, as this commission has already looked at it and studied, will go towards water quality, water protection, and land protection. About 15% of the bond dollars are being earmarked for trails and recreational purposes, which are important to sort of the wholesome development of our county. So with that being said, it's up to the voters, and I think that that's important, and that's how voters, that's how everybody has their say in the matter. I know that Johnson County recently passed a bond, but at about the $20 million level. And this bond has to reach a certain threshold. I believe it's 60% of the electorate has to agree with it. And I'm hopeful that Linn County, particularly in light of all of the issues that have been raised with our flooding issues and flood mitigation, all of the issues that residents of Polk County have been talking about in terms of water quality and water protection, I would hope that the voters of Linn County take seriously this bond measure and vote to support it.
Thank you.
Do we have time for rebuttal?
We would prefer not to do rebuttal,
Okay.
but if you can keep it
Just real quick.
real quick.
With the percentages that were put out, yet again with the non-transparency, excuse me, with the non-transparency that the Linn County has already shown, how do we know that those funds are actually going to build those trails? How do we know that they're actually going to build the parks? Why are we not working on the parks and the trails that we have already and making them and improving them first and then building new?
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
All right, Mr. Walker, what leadership can you, as a supervisor, bring to minimize the stratification of high and low income neighborhoods across our county?
That is an excellent question. On the Safe, Equitable, and Thriving Communities Task Force, one of our subcommittees deals specifically with housing. We are looking at different policies and practices throughout the county that contribute to concentrations of poverty, and not only concentrations of poverty, but sort of what has been termed the gentrification of neighborhoods. And we can see that happening in some of our most promising neighborhoods in Cedar Rapids, at least. What I think we have to do from a policy standpoint is not be too prescriptive to developers and where they can and cannot build. But I think what we need to do is commit ourselves to the sort of development that we want to see. We want to see equitable development. We want to see all of our areas, both in the metropolitan cities and the rural communities. We want to see them flourish. We want to see them have the same opportunities to develop their localities just like everyone else. And I think in order to do that, in order to have that commitment, you need to get all players on board. This is an issue that transcends the county. We need to be working with our partners in municipal government. We need to be working with our partners in the nonprofit sector to make sure that we are not only building just so developers can get rich, but we're building so that we can build healthy, thriving, vibrant communities. And I think if I'm elected, I will be an advocate for a new urbanist approach to development.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Jensen?
I love committees and subcommittees and committees for the committee's committee. But what actionable plans do they actually put in place? What do we see them doing that actually helps the people that are around them? I can see them allocating money here or there, but then they need another committee for that. They need to sit around and they need to talk about it a little bit more, talk about it for another month, talk about it for another year. How many years are we going to sit here and talk about something before we actually do something? Why are we not out doing instead of talking? The time for talk has been done years ago, years and years ago. And for us to think that Cedar Rapids and Linn County cannot come up with a solution to this problem within our city limits, within our county limits, is preposterous. Like I said, we are the second largest county in the state of Iowa. We have so many tax dollars coming into us that we should be allocating to programs instead of sitting around talking about programs. When I'm elected, I will not sit around and talk about programs. I will implement programs. I will take the suggestions and take what you are telling me and put them into action instead of sitting and talking and making more committees about subcommittees. Thank you.
Okay. Mr. Jensen, the next question is, how would you propose to address mental health needs under the present funding offered by the state?
It's a very good question. Some of you may or may not know, I actually have a sister who has mental and physical handicaps. This is an issue that's near and dear to my heart and the rest of my family. We need to band together. It's just like working with the veterans, working with PTSD. We need to band together as a community, and yet again, being the second largest county with all these tax dollars coming in, where is all that money going? Why is it not going to programs? Why is it not going to those that need it to bring them in for the health care that they need? Why are we sitting here talking today when there needs to be action taken? So what we need to do is we need to put together a plan so that way we can bring those that are in our rural areas and those that are in our urban areas together and get the help that they need. And we need to allocate those tax dollars from frivolous spending that what I call the spendocrats on the other side take the money and they spend it out on situations and buildings that are downtown. They have asbestos in it. Why are we not tearing that down? And why are we not allocating the money then to healthcare? Another example, why are we spending $5 million on a hotel that should stay downtown and keep businesses here, and yet alone we take that money, we buy out a business, and now we're going to wipe them out, and now we're losing more tax dollars. What we need to do is take that money today and work on healthcare and work on transportation to get those people the help that they need and bring them in to Cedar Rapids or bring them into Iowa City, wherever we need to go to take them for their help. Thank you.
Thank you. And Mr. Walker?
Just as a point of clarification, the recent hotel that was sold was purchased by the city of Cedar Rapids, and not the county. Look,
We as the county can do something about that.
okay. Linn, the counties in Iowa have recently moved to a regional model of delivering mental health care services. This was to provide some sort of parity in the resources that were allocated by the state legislature for those recipients who needed these services. On April 1st of this year, the governor moved to privatize our Medicaid program, and many individuals who receive mental health care services also receive Medicaid services. One of the primary responsibilities of counties and county government is to be a safety net for the safety net. What we are starting to see in counties as the state legislature continues to pull funding for critical services like mental health care we are starting to see the brunt of the work fall onto counties. And counties are struggling to continue to come up with funding for nonprofit organizations like the Abbey Center that provide these critical services for people who need them the most. Now, what I think we need to do is to continue to work with our partners in the legislature. Senator Liz Mathis has done a wonderful job in the legislature advocating for increased oversight since the governor's move to privatize the Medicaid system, and she's been a long advocate for increased funding in mental health care services. The counties rely on their funding for mental health services from the state. In fact, there are statutory limitations to how much money we can spend there. So we have to be working with our partners in the state legislature if we want to address this problem in a meaningful way.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Walker, this question is for you. It's both a question and an editorial comment. Please explain your position on raising the minimum wage. If you are against it, tell us how you can look a single parent in the eye who is trying to live on $9 an hour and tell them that it is acceptable.
I wouldn't look that parent in the eye and tell them that it's acceptable, because it isn't. I am in favor of raising the minimum wage to a living wage. I think the process that was initiated by Supervisor Rogers was the correct action in bringing together all different stakeholders in our community, from business owners to folks who are earning the minimum wage. Look, all of the research on this issue is clear. If we empower those individuals who live in our community by raising their wages, they will be able to go out and patronize businesses, buy products and services. If we raise the wage in Linn County to a living wage to $10.10 an hour and phase it in to 2017, 18,400 individuals will see a raise in their wage. 52% of that population are women, and 54% of that population are full-time workers, and a quarter of which are 40 years old and older. We're not talking about high school kids working summer jobs. We're talking about families. And when you empower families to be able to participate in their economy, then we all do better. So I'm an advocate of raising the minimum wage. I think the process Supervisor Rogers initiated is the right way to go in this county. And if I'm elected, I will be an advocate for the regular study of the minimum wage, taking into account the overall economic health of the county, but most importantly, the overall economic health of our residents.
Thank you, Mr. Walker. Mr. Jensen.
We have a less than 0.3% growth here in Iowa. So what constitutes and what justifies a $10.10 an hour wage? Because once you raise the lower end, you must raise the higher end. Because when you're working with somebody and they're going to sit there and, hey, now I'm only making 50 cents an hour more than the person that just came in. And this only affects 13% of the constituents here in Linn County if you actually look at the numbers. 13%, which mainly do, yes, affect women, do, yes, affect those college age and high school kids as well. One of the things that we need to look at, though, is that we do not empower people by giving them money. We empower them by giving them education to make more money. We should not just be handing out, we should be handing up to people. There is no reason that we, as Linn County, should be raising the minimum wage. Why should we have 99 different minimum wages here in the state of Iowa? This is a state issue. This is an issue that we should not be taking up here. We should be leaving this issue to the businesses and the business growth that is happening here in Cedar Rapids and in the Midwest as a whole. This is a very, very hot button issue, I understand. And I'm not saying that I'm against people making a living wage. Far from that. I am more than happy to see everyone making a living wage. But if you can see, those that come into these jobs, they're first-time jobs, you know, they are not there to support a family of four. They're only there so you can get your foot in the door to start making more. And most jobs, once you get in that door, within 6 months to a year, you will be making that living wage. So unless you're job hopping, or unless you're going from one business to another, you should be making your living wage. And if you want a better wage, the best way we can do that is promote education.
Okay, thank you. Switching gears a little bit, Mr. Jensen, could you identify areas where the county and cities, especially Cedar Rapids, within the county, could work together for the betterment of both?
Very good question. Very, very, very good example. The flood. How long has Cedar Rapids been sitting on a river? And how long has it been that we cannot find an applicable way to make sure that we're not tearing down buildings, that we're not taking out businesses, that we're not just throwing away tax dollars that we could be utilizing in stopping the floods from even occurring? We can put up levees. We can have them year-round instead of just when a flood hits. Why are we putting Band-Aids on things when we should have the brace already in place? This is a very, very good question. Another hot-button issue, like we were saying, the mental health and healthcare issues. That's something that we as a county should be working with the city of Cedar Rapids to work in transportation areas to bring people from the outside areas in to Cedar Rapids so they can get the mental health and the physical help that they need. Thank you.
Thank you. And Mr. Walker?
I'd be remiss if I didn't point out that the city of Cedar Rapids has committed an enormous amount of resources, particularly since 2008 in flood mitigation and flood protection. And the city of Cedar Rapids ought to be commended for that. In addition to their efforts, the Iowa legislature has also committed enormous resources to flood mitigation, flood protection efforts.
To an amphitheater.
Okay. As I was saying, the two, on the issue of working with municipal governments, particularly the city of Cedar Rapids, there is a lot of room for collaboration. And there is already a lot of partnerships there that are going on. In addition to working, of course, to protect our communities from future flooding events, I think the county can continue to work with municipal governments on economic development. When I graduated from college, most of my peers and friends who weren't going into advanced training in medicine told me they were going to move to cities like Austin, to cities like Denver, or they're moving to Brooklyn. And they weren't moving there for a job. They were moving there because that's where they wanted to live and they would find a job there. I think we have a wonderful opportunity here in Linn County, working with Cedar Rapids and other cities and towns in the county, to think about how we are going to do economic development moving forward so that we invest in public amenities, public spaces, and we create the sort of environment that will attract young talent that will then power our economy. So in addition to things like public safety measures, like working on flood protection, I think we have an opportunity to think about how we want to develop our cities and towns for the future.
Okay, we just had a request that if you could both speak up a little bit more. People are having some difficulty hearing you in the back. So if you could just do that a little bit louder, that'd be terrific. Okay, this one is for Mr. Walker. It really has to do with how you plan to represent all of the citizens in your district. What are you hearing from constituents? Where are you meeting them? And how do you plan to represent them?
Well, District 2 is a district I spend the most time in. And it's a very diverse district in terms of there is a lot of business and industry on the southwest side of town. On the southeast side of town, there's a lot of residential neighborhoods. We also have, we stretch out into college community, that precinct. So there are a number of issues that I hear when I'm on the doors talking to constituents. But in terms of representing the entire county, I assume the impetus for this question is rooted in the fact that I have often said that it's high time that we have a minority perspective on the Board of Supervisors. And I think that's important. I will never shy away from that. But elected officials are elected to represent every one of their constituents. And I think you got to do your best to hold listening posts. You got to encourage civic engagement. We need more residents to come to county board meetings and come to county commission meetings. And I think we need to continue as leaders in our communities and elected officials to educate the public on what it is we're thinking about and our approaches to solving problems. And I think you can co-create solutions, and I think you can come up with a process in which residents in the county feel comfortable talking to their elected officials, and elected officials feel comfortable being completely transparent and talking about their plans. So if I'm elected, that's one of the things I've been talking about my entire campaign. If I'm elected, I hope to bring that spirit of collaboration to office.
Okay, Mr. Jensen.
Thank you. I definitely believe that it shouldn't be how somebody looks for the office. Shouldn't be if somebody's groomed for an office. Should be if somebody's the best qualified for the office. If they have the tenacity, the gumption, the know-how of how to get things done. Like I said, I can sit around, I can have a committee about the committee's committee, but what does that do? I can sit around and talk about, I can have a book club, doesn't mean I want to be Harry Potter now, does it? We can go around talking all day long, but until we're doing something about it, we need to not look at the person, but we need to look at the credentials, the background, and what they can do for the county. Not what they might do for the county, what they'll talk about doing for the county. We need to go out and bring not only the rural, but the urban areas together. Like I said, Cedar Rapids is one of the biggest small towns. You can go down the street and say, hey Bob, hey Mary, how's it going? Where else are you going to be able to do that? And that's one of the things that we need to strive for here in the Midwest, is still being inclusive of everyone. Not saying one group needs more issues, one group has more things that they need, one group needs this, everybody does need something. But we need to be able to listen to everyone instead of saying this group is more important than that group. This group needs this, that group needs it more than that one. No, everyone needs that help, and we should not care how we're looking, but how we utilize our resources to help the people that are around us.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Jensen, this one is for you first, and actually there are 3 questions, but they all revolve around the same thing, and that's the economy, economic development, poverty, job opportunities. What can the county do to improve employment opportunities? Education is simply not enough. This writer has 3 degrees and is working on a master's degree and is a public employee that doesn't make a living wage to support a family. So how can we support our community when our community doesn't fund or reward education? We seem to have a brain drain because of a lack of opportunity in jobs. And then what will you do to empower those that are on food stamps and public assistance to get jobs and to help themselves? So it's really a multifaceted question about the economy and low wages.
Studies have shown that when working with people that are homeless, that don't have homes, it does not help just to give the education, just to give the food, just to give the money. We need to find places for them to live. If they're not living somewhere, they're not going to get the job. They're not going to get the food. They're not going to get the resources that are needed to allocate to them. And what we need to do is find the solution together and finding a way to find them homes. And then we can work on the jobs. Then we can work on the education. One of the things that they said was education does not get you fed. That could happen. I know professors that, they eat ramen at home, because it's a struggle sometimes when you do have that education. But one of the things that I'm proposing when I get elected is that not to make Cedar Rapids the hub for all the other major cities out there. Why is everybody leaving to go to Minnesota? Why are they saying, oh, let's go to Chicago for the weekend? Oh, there's a baseball game in St. Louis. No. It's high time that we become the destination in Linn County. We need to be that integral part that brings people from the Midwest here. And when that happens, we will bring the jobs. When the jobs come, the money comes. When the money comes, we can help more. So we need to get out there and bring the jobs here to Cedar Rapids instead of letting them go, instead of buying off businesses and saying, sorry, we don't need your money. We need to bring them here and say, yes, be with us, help us, and then we're helping you. You got skilled workers now. We have the education that's out there. This person with 3 degrees can then go out and find that job that will give them that living wage, that will put food on their table, that will help their family, that will help that family afford. It is high time we bring the jobs here to Cedar Rapids instead of letting them go to the bigger cities. Cedar Rapids is the big city. Linn County is the big county.
Thank you. Mr. Walker?
You know, I've heard stories like that before, the questioner has, where you've got people who have ample education, and so goes the story of the United States. It's supposed to be, if you work hard, you do the right things, you go to school, you're supposed to be able to get a job and support yourself. That's a primary example of why we do need a living wage, and that's why I commend the Board of Supervisors for taking a step in that direction. Now, in addition to making sure we have a living wage, there are some other things we can do, and I mentioned briefly earlier, to encourage sort of a healthy economic development for our county. And really, that comes down to this. If you look at sort of the last 50 to 75 years of how governments have tried to do economic development, and I'm not saying it's all bad, but usually what you see are municipalities offering mega corporations public financing in the form of tax increment financing or other tax incentives to get them to locate their businesses in their cities, in their towns, in their county, in exchange for the idea that they are going to hire people and grow the tax base. Well, I'm telling you now, folks in the millennial generation and the generations afterwards, they move to the places they want to go, and then they try to find a job. So I think we have to do both in terms of economic development. There's certainly a role for governments to partner with the private sector to bring businesses to our county, to bring businesses to our city. But if we're not thinking of ways to develop our cities and turn them into places where people want to live and put down roots and start families, then we're shortchanging ourselves in terms of economic development. You can ask Rockwell. Their turnover of engineers they bring in, and then a couple years later, they take off and they take lower paying jobs in Austin or Denver. And I think we've got to do a better job at having a more comprehensive economic development policy.
Okay, thank you. Switching gears, a shorter question, but no less in depth. What are we going to do in our county to assist veterans? And this is for Mr. Walker.
That's a great question. The Linn County Veterans Affairs Department is one of the best in the state and has provided redress in terms of millions of dollars to veterans who were owed those benefits. They have operated food pantries for veterans, and I think they really do a good job. Now, for a man or woman to put on the uniform and go serve their country is an honorable thing, and I think we need to spare no expense when it comes to ensuring that we're doing everything we can do at the county level to make sure they have what they need when they get home in terms of access to quality medical care and access to any other resources they may need. Now, it's important to understand that Linn County has to operate within a larger federal framework. And so it's important that we are working with our counterparts in the federal government to ensure that benefits owed to our veterans actually find their way, federal benefits actually find their way to our veterans living in our county. So in short, again, I want to say I think the Veterans Affairs Department here is doing a wonderful job. But if there is anything else that they need, if we find that there are cogs in the system, then I think it's the job of county supervisors to figure out how to identify the problem and figure out how we can solve for it. And that's what I would do if I'm elected county supervisor.
Thank you. Mr. Jensen.
Being a veteran myself, when I first came back to Cedar Rapids, I went into the Northeast Side outreach post and just coming back, looking for, hey, what's going on? Is there any jobs available? Sorry, we can't help you. You're not part of our area. So unless you're actually a veteran and you've been in these situations and you've been to the areas where they need to help you, you have no idea what they're doing. They're siphoning funds, and yet again, if I have my buddy and I say, hey, you want to run a little outpost for us, I can line their pockets with money, no problem. Doesn't mean that anything's being done, doesn't mean that anything's being helped. What we need to do is actually talk to the veterans and what they need. Help them, actually go out to them, because there are a lot of them that do have PTSD. I have friends that have PTSD, and you know what happens? They don't want to leave their home. They don't want to go out, and they don't want to search for that thing because they have that fear of rejection like I had when I came back. Why should they be rejected when, like is being set up here, we should be helping them, doing everything we can, but why are they getting turned away? Why can we not have a transportation system to get our veterans here in Linn County down to the VA in Iowa City? Why do we have troubles getting them to the one on Wiley Boulevard here in Cedar Rapids? How can we not be able to transport and help the veterans that are here today that need the help, that are just getting cast aside and saying, sorry, not today? Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, on another subject entirely, and also with another editorial comment. What is your priority for maintaining roads in the county, which is known for as 3 seasons of road construction? And Mr. Jensen, you may start.
I know this one all too well, being here from Cedar Rapids. You go to one area of town, they have one road open, then, oh wait, there's a roadblock. Nope, now we got to go down this road. Nope, that was a one-way, so now we got to go back this way. Oh, nope, that one's closed up because that one's under road construction too. We need to have a better plan, a better way to manage our roads, not only in Cedar Rapids, but out in the county level as well. Because those county roads are being neglected. I have driven on them. I have friends and family that live out in the rural areas here. And when you go out there, why do we still have gravel roads in places that should be paved so that way emergency vehicles can get to them? So that way those that need the medical attention can get the medical attention that they need, but they aren't getting it because the roads are bad. How are we not allocating the money yet again as Linn County, the second largest county, having troubles with roads? I spent 6 years in Europe, and one of the things that I found when I was living there in Germany, they would redo their roads every 5 years. Where do they have the money? Aren't we not the richest nation? Are we not one of the best counties here in the state of Iowa that has the most money to allocate to roads and to the funding to fix them? When will we get out from our councils? When will we get out and do something? That's the biggest problem I see. We talk a lot, don't do much. We need to get out and fix the roads and do it in a timely and a better planned fashion than having every other road worked on at the same time. Thank you.
Thank you. And Mr. Walker?
So the county manages secondary roads, highways, and bridges. Most of the roads that folks drive on in their cities are managed by their city government. When it comes to the secondary roads and the highway system, folks here in the audience should be reminded that the county budget is mandated by Iowa code to segregate their funds for their secondary roads, which means that we can't pull from the general funds to budget dollars for our roads. It comes from a specific outlay from the tax receipts that we receive. So unless the state government passes certain taxes, special taxes, in which we can get additional funds, we are limited in what we can do. We are limited in the budget by the Iowa code. Now with that said, the secondary roads, the engineering and secondary roads department of Linn County, I think does a wonderful job at coming up with 5-year plans in which to address secondary roads and bridges. And I have said, it's published online, I think on my website, certainly the Gazette Voter Guide has published this. I have said that you need to start with what your roads professionals and engineers are telling you are the most important needs to keep these roads and bridges safe. And I think we need to prioritize what the experts tell us we need to prioritize first. And then every other project, I think you have to, as you approach every other budget, as you approach your own budget at home, you need to figure out, you need to make those projects priorities in terms of how it would affect the larger budget. So again, I think it would be wise for us to know that the Iowa code is very specific when it comes to the roads budget. And I think those are some of the constraints that county supervisors operate under.
Just real quick.
Thank you.
I would like to question on why I see your Linn County tax dollars at work on this road inside the city limits.
Well, I can answer that. Cedar Rapids is part of Linn County.
Exactly.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. Jeez. All right, so let's ask a question that might not require 2 minutes. Since 2009, supervisors' salaries have increased 30%. Do you agree with that? Can you justify that increase? And if not, why not?
Is that going?
I'm sorry, that goes to, who just finished speaking?
Mr. Walker.
I'll take it first.
Okay.
That makes it easier. The issue of salary, supervisor salary, has really taken a prominent role in this election, and I'm glad that it has. With the caveat of this, I think Mr. Jensen and I both agree that the Board of Supervisors should remain at 5 supervisors. I have often said that the push to move the Board of Supervisors from 5 to 3 is all about compensation. And I think we need to separate those two issues, because if you go from 5 to 3, I think you start compromising governance. I think you make it harder for my friends on the right to get elected, and I think rural communities lose their representation. With that said, getting back to the salary question, there is a compensation board that weighs in on the salary of elected officials. If elected, if this conversation continues, I would welcome the conversation and dialogue about supervisor salaries. But I think we should also include in that conversation the salaries of all of our county elected officials. And furthermore, a larger point I'd like to make. If you look at our representation in city government and in state government, I think the salaries, Susie, you might correct me on this, are somewhere between $13,000 and $15,000 at those levels. What that means is it limits who can go in and serve as your representatives. You see in state government particularly, many of our representatives are retired individuals, many of our representatives are wealthy, many of our representatives are in financial situations where they don't need to worry about feeding their families. And I think if we're going to get serious about having professionals do the job of representing our needs and interests, we need to get serious about the issue of compensating individuals who run for office. And that is my position on the subject.
Thank you. Mr. Jensen?
This is one of the few issues that we do agree on, staying at 5 instead of going to 3. And yes, it is a separate issue of compensation, but we should look at it now. Why, as a Linn County Board of Supervisors, should I be making 3 to 4 times those that we're saying are in the poverty level here in Cedar Rapids? Why are we not taking our salaries, reducing them from $103,000 plus benefits, why not to $70,000 plus benefits? Why not even less? Here's the question. Because they want your tax dollars and line the pockets. We need to stop lining the pockets of politicians. We need to take the money and give it back to the people. I know that right now, if we take the supervisors from 5 to 3, that'll save us about $860,000. Well, if we reduce the amount that we make to $70,000, that will have us a cost savings of about $660,000. Pretty comparable. You still have the representation of the 5 supervisors. That way the rural area still has their representation. But you also have the cost effectiveness of having a reduced salary. And what we can do with those salaries that are $13,000, that are $15,000, we can raise them to a living wage. And if we need more elected officials in areas that are not being represented, that's an incentive, is it not? We need to take the money and put it back into the people's pockets, not our own. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And Mr. Jensen, the county is subsidizing the construction of a private baseball park, I believe it's called Prospect Meadows, in rural Marion. Is this a wise use of county funds, and do you support this project?
We do have baseball parks here in Cedar Rapids already. I understand that they want to build another one out in Marion. What that does is it brings more people to our area. Have you not seen Little League World Series? Have you not seen the areas where people will bring in more money to our county by having these areas, more parks, more areas for kids to go and grow up? With that being said, why do we need another ballpark? Why can we not utilize the ballparks that we already have? Why not take the money that we have and allocate it to the ballparks that are already here, upgrade them, and have it the nationally accredited ballparks that we used to have here. I remember when there was AAU tournaments every weekend in the summer. I remember when there were softball tournaments here every single year. We had the World National Softball slow pitch tournaments here, Tate Cummins Softball Complex in our district. Why are they gone? Why are they not coming back here to where they need to be? That brings more money, more revenue to us. To then we can use that money and use those resources to help other areas that we're talking about today. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Walker.
You know, I guess I'm not sure if my opponent supports that project or not. I think it's a good project, and I think projects like investing in public amenities around the county, again, to reiterate an earlier point I made, is part of a larger comprehensive economic development plan I think we need to be looking at. The reality of it is that when you invest in and create spaces for families, for people who live in the community, and you provide these amenities to these individuals, they are more apt to stay here. And if we can figure out innovative ways to partner with cities, to partner with the private sector, to continue to develop our cities and towns in the county in a manner that would be attractive to young graduates, in a manner that would be attractive when we are competing for talent around the country, then we're going to get at that brain drain. We're going to keep talented professionals here. We're going to create spaces and neighborhoods where families want to raise their kids. And I think that goes into it. Now, in all fairness, I have not looked at the specifics of that project, but it fits into my philosophy of economic development, and I think these projects are the way to go.
Okay, thank you.
Could I just answer his question? For or against?
Okay.
Just real quick.
Real quick.
Thank you. I am for the project as long as we rebuild and make better what we already have. Why are we not making better what we already have? I have a sister that lives up in that area. It's a logistical nightmare.
Thank you. Okay, Mr. Walker, what are your plans, kind of along those same lines, what are your plans to adequately fund our libraries full-time?
Well, I am a big fan of our library. I think it's a wonderful, of the Cedar Rapids Library. I think it's a wonderful project. And I was disheartened to see that a sales tax option was not passed recently to further support the library. I think what we have to do is look to the residents on this one. In the same way that there was a campaign for local option sales tax, I think we need to do the same thing. And I think what we need to do, just like we as supervisors, or we hope to be supervisors, we need to do a better job at educating the public about what we do and the vastness of what we do. I think we need to educate the public on the necessity of libraries and why they're important and how they add to the community and the services they provide to individuals who fall in the digital divide, who don't have access to the internet. And the services it provides that bring the community together. So I'm an advocate for public financing, and I think we need to be smart about the way in which we lead that campaign, but I'd like to see that question on the ballot again, and I'd like the county to do whatever it could to provide a carve-out in its budget and maintain those funds for the library moving forward.
Thank you. Mr. Jensen.
As we can see, this is another quid pro quo type answer where we tax and we spend. We tax and we spend. When does the taxing and spending end? When should we not reduce the taxing that we're doing to everybody and utilize the money that's already coming in? Why can we not utilize the money that we already have in? Yet again, second largest county in the entire state. Second largest budget out of 99 counties. Why can we not allocate funds to fund the libraries that are already here? Why can we not build new libraries with the tax dollars that we're already getting in? It's one of the things that we need to keep asking ourselves, is this the kind of rhetoric that we need in office when we just tax and spend? Or is it time to cut out the taxing on everyone? Because I know people, they're about to retire. They have their home. They don't know if they can keep their home because the taxes keep going up. When is it time that we stop taxing the individuals over and over again and start utilizing the money that's already coming in? And with that, we can utilize more business growth and utilize the taxes from businesses that are coming in instead of just taxing the individuals here in the county. But I do believe in the libraries. I do believe in the education that the libraries do provide. Thank you.
Okay. Mr. Jensen, I don't think this was directed at you. It just says you seem to want to develop the county, but what about those who like rural areas kept rural?
Oh, that's no problem. I mean, we can grow within our borders that we have already. There's no reason, as we've already discussed, we're knocking down buildings in the middle of our town here in Cedar Rapids, in the middle of Linn County, when we should be building up. There's no reason that we need to build out necessarily out and take out all the rural areas that are around us. We should be building in our city, which creates jobs, which brings more jobs here, which then gives us more tax dollars, which then takes care of the other issues that we've been brought up today. It's one of those things where if we grow within, then out, we will not lose our identity of a rural area and a rural county here in Linn County. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Walker?
This is why it's important that we maintain a district system when it comes to how we elect supervisors. We've got 2 supervisors on the board right now that represent most of rural Linn County. So it's important that they are able to articulate the desires of the constituents in their districts. And if it is the case that most of the constituents in their district is for or against a certain type of development, it's up to them to advocate for that at the board level. One example is Supervisor Harris, who represents Palo and some other rural areas, voted against the raise in the minimum wage. Not necessarily because I think he was against it, but because he said in those hearings, he said, I'm hearing a lot from my constituents and this is not the way they want to go. So I think it's important that we have representatives from districts that can articulate the needs and the desires of the individuals who live in their districts. And furthermore, look, smart economic development isn't about changing the face of a place and where you live. It's about making sure economic opportunities exist there for those individuals who want to take advantage of them. So this is not a one-size-fits-all approach, and that's, again, the beauty and the virtue of having 5 supervisors that represent many different districts around, 5 different districts around the county.
Okay. This will be our last question that we have time for this evening. And so, Mr. Walker, I'm going to ask that you first. What issue in your political decision-making most made you want to run for Linn County Supervisor?
I'll tell you this. I got deeply involved in the issue of poverty in Linn County. And I heard it said to me a couple times, Stacy, what does a county have to do with poverty? And my answer was, well, they do a lot in terms of preventing systemic poverty, but also, if it is the case that our residents don't know, then somebody needs to be there to expand the role of the county to address this issue that, again, affects individuals who live both in the metropolitan areas but in our rural communities as well. So for me, my call to service was in an effort to be a voice for those who don't currently have one. In a roundabout way, I think my opponent tonight has tried to make my candidacy about race, and insinuating that I'm only running to represent one group of people, and that's false. I'm running to help as many people as I can here in the county, and I'm running because I believe that the county can do a lot to help folks who are in these precarious positions. And if elected, that'll be sort of my North Star.
Okay, and Mr. Jensen?
I had service to the country. I was a civil affairs trauma sergeant for over 4 years helping people. I joined the military to help people, not to hurt them. When I got injured, I couldn't help them on a national level anymore. But where did I want to go? I wanted to come back home. Cedar Rapids, Linn County. I wanted to come back and help those that cannot help themselves. I agree with my opponent on that one, definitely. We need to help those that don't have the voice. With that being said, We should not be sitting up here telling you what needs to happen. When I'm elected, I will hold forums on a bi-weekly to weekly basis to hear from the constituents themselves the issues that need to be brought and present to the board. There's no reason that we should be elected and then ignore you for 4 years, and then 4 years later come back to you and say, oh, what are the issues now? What's different? What changed? No, we need to hear your voice in our ear. We need to be there listening to you. That's one of the things that I will bring when elected. I will listen to you, the ones that vote us in, on what issues that you need. And I'm not making it about one place or one other. I say we should be all inclusive. This is the Midwest, you know? We're not rival gangs. We're not trying to go after one person or another. This is Cedar Rapids, Iowa. This is Linn County. This is where you could walk down the street and say, hey, Bob, hey, Jim, how's it going? How's your day going? Because you know them and you respect them. And that's what we need. The respect of everyone together, working together on these issues. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll get to closing statements in just a moment. If your question was not read this evening, you may lay the blame directly at my feet, and I will take responsibility for that. I tried to choose those questions that most had to do with the work, the actual work that supervisors do. And so if your question was sort of peripherally related to that, it might not have gotten read. Issues like rapid transportation, public banking, we touched on the environment and hunger and poverty, so I didn't read that one. Republican and party reaching across party lines, a little bit about racism, what your priorities were. We talked about youth and gun violence. We already talked about priorities, flood protection, and budget priorities. So if your question did not get answered, I think that the candidates would be happy to stay after for several minutes, and you may directly ask them your question. Otherwise, I will take responsibility for not having asked the question. Stacy Walker will go first. You will have 2 minutes for a closing statement, followed by Adam Jensen. So, Mr.
All
Walker.
right. Well, thank you again to the League of Women Voters for sponsoring this forum, and thank you all for coming out. It's I was not expecting a crowd of this size to listen to a forum with 2 individuals who are hoping to be a county supervisor. And that's, again, one of the reasons why I'm running. I'm running to encourage civic engagement. You know, in my past life, working on campaigns, I was a community organizer. And I got out in the communities around this county, around this state, really, to educate folks on the importance of being involved in the process. I think one of the jobs of someone who is elected to public office is to help educate the public. And not only educate the public on the issues that they're trying to deal with, but to put a listening ear out there and engage with the public, to figure out what issues matter most to them. If I'm elected, I'm going to focus on 3 things. That is putting people at the center of our economic development policies. It is also focusing on systemic poverty and how it's ravaging communities in the metropolitan areas and communities in the rural areas. And then finally, if I'm elected, I think what we need to do, what's critical to our role, is ensuring that support services for individuals who have mental health issues, for individuals who have developmental disabilities, individuals who are on our Medicaid program, all of the most vulnerable in society needs someone at the local level advocating on their behalf. And that's what I intend to do. Thank you all for listening. I really appreciate it.
Mr. Jensen.
There's been a lot discussed tonight. I'd like to thank the League of Women Voters. Thank you very much for having me. Thank you for coming out. Lively debate, love it. That's what we need. Far too often, we as elected officials sit behind a desk, just like this, and don't listen to anyone. When is it time for us to get out to you, the people, and have you let us know what needs to happen? It's time for us to work with you instead of against you. It's time for us to work together as a community as a whole, as Linn County as a whole. It's time for us to come together and realize what the rhetoric that has been going on is not right. We should not be taxing and spending. We should not take your money and line our pockets with them. It's time that we take the tax dollars and take it back to the people. I know that poverty has been discussed, hot button issue. Living wage, hot button issue. It's great to have these hot button issues and yet again, have a forum, have a discussion. Let's talk about the committees, subcommittees, committee. Let's sit around, let's have an actionable plan. It's time that we go out and do something about what's happening and not just sit around and talk about it. It's time that we, as Linn County constituents, rise up together, vote someone in who will do something, who will take the stand to say, no, we need to help those people. We need to get out. We need to get them to where they need to go. We need to take them to the medical facility. We need to help our veterans. We need to get out there and we need to talk to the people instead of sitting behind these desks and not doing what we need to do. When you elect me, you will get action, not words. Thank you.
Let's give both these candidates a round of applause. I would personally like to thank both of these candidates, not just for being here tonight, but for running it all. You have no idea how much effort, energy, time it takes to run for public office. And then you have no idea how much time it actually takes when you get it. So I want to thank you for putting yourselves out there, for allowing us to hear from you both. It means a great deal to those of us who care about our systems of government. And I'm really proud that both of you have been here tonight. Thank you also to Kirkwood Community College for providing this facility. And thank you to all of you for being here, for asking some really tough, interesting questions tonight. As you can tell, we couldn't get to them all. But it's to your credit that you have so many questions out there that you want answers for before you cast your ballot. And that's my last thing for all of you. If you haven't voted already, I have. If you haven't voted already, don't forget to vote. You must vote. It's important. It's important not just for candidates. It's important for our democracy. So don't forget to vote. For those of you who might be interested, we have one last candidate forum, which will happen next Wednesday, October 26th, from 7 to 8:30. It is the District 70 State Representative Forum, and it will be held at Taft Middle School. So if you are in District 70 or you have an interest in the District 70 race, please come from 7 to 8:30 at Taft next Wednesday. And with that, thank you all for being here tonight. Really appreciate it. Have a good evening. Thank you.